Welcome to Comic Sans, the podcast about comics for those who are sans knowledge. I'm Yen. I'm usually the comics half of this podcast, and with me as always is
me, Nathaniel, Nat. And with us, not as always, in fact, for the first time on the show, and the first guest of season 4, Ritesh Babu. Everyone, please give him a virtual round of applause. Woohoo!
Or if you're in public, give an actual round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Ritesh, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let me just tell our listeners a little bit about Ritesh. So, Ritesh Babu is a writer and critic of comics, film, politics, and pop culture whose work has appeared in Vox, Polygon, PanelxPanel, among others. In some sense, he's already been on our show when the episode on the Savage Shores last season, which was really fueled by his essay, Civilized Monsters, These Savage Shores and the Colonialist Cage in the Gutter Review. Ritesh enjoys reading postcolonial theory, genre fiction, and far too many sports manga. Let's welcome Ritesh once again to the show.
Woo! You know, I was just going to say one thing we do have in common, Ritesh, is our love for football.
Football is the greatest sport on earth. I love it.
I agree. Thank you. You know, I don't know if you know, I live in Manchester right now.
Oh. Okay, I have to ask, which club?
I know. So this is where we've got a bit of an issue, you see, because for once, I'm so glad to have a fellow football fan on this podcast. It's been a very lonely experience for 4 seasons. For the first time, someone who gets the game. But then this is where we diverge because I am a diehard United fan. I am a season ticket holder.
That's fine. I totally respect it because, listen, I think the big thing is, if I grew up, maybe 10 years ago, I'd also be an SAF guy, and I'd be a United person. But I grew up in the Pep Guardiola era, so
yeah,
for me, it's City. But that's a generation. Yeah, I totally get it.
What you're saying is we're both glory hunters, is what you're saying.
Listen, we both like great managers and people who can do great things at a very high level. And SAF was incredible, and I think Pep's incredible. It's fueled by the appeal of watching somebody who's at the very best of their career and art form, just doing their thing.
I agree. Just shaking that.
It seemed like the unsaid implication of this was that there was a team that could have been said that would have made everyone angry.
So my team and his team are directly rival teams. You have to understand. There's a neighborhood rivalry thing going.
I see.
It's United and City, red and blue.
Ritesh is a Manchester City fan, and I am a Manchester United fan. If I need to spell it out for you, Yen.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it sounds like they should be friends.
Sometimes we're friends in the instances wherein we have to ensure Liverpool don't win the league and beat, SAF and United's whole record. In those instances, there's unlikely allyship to be found. But yeah, apart from that, heated rivals.
I feel like I also need to clarify for Yen that SAF does not stand for Singapore Armed Forces. It stands for Sir Alex Ferguson, who is the greatest manager.
Arguably the greatest manager of all time.
In the history of football, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the one thing I know about football, and Nat has heard me say this, when other people are talking about football and I don't know what anyone's saying, I'll weigh in with something I saw on Twitter all the time, which is, what is Fergie doing?
Oh my God. Yes. Okay.
That's literally the only thing I can contribute, and it doesn't contribute at all. Coming back to the show, but it doesn't even have to be about comics. What's something everyone's been enjoying lately? Nat, do you want to start?
Yeah, and funnily enough, this is really related to comics because just last night, I and my wife went to watch Superman. Both of you will have a lot more thoughts on that than I do, but I enjoyed it. But then funnily enough, after watching Superman, I came home and in preparation for today's episode, I went and I read your essay, Ritesh, The Limits of an Idea, which was in PanelxPanel, which uses Superman as the entry point to talk about this idea of these big corporations being the custodians of these IP and what that means and all the crap that creators go through. And then I felt bad. And so I don't know if I'm able to say I enjoyed that movie anymore because I gave money to DC. So you guys can talk me through this.
See, I think it's fair in the sense of I think you can like the work while also just being critical of the entire enterprise around it. I think that's just a complication that anybody navigates, right? So let's say I like Grant Morrison's work a bunch. And I liked it more when I was younger, I would say, than now. But at the same time, it's it was mostly in these corporate lines. And even Ramvi, who works in these spaces now, whose book we're about to talk about, has done significant work in those spaces. And some of his work, like The Swamp Thing, I really, really like. Should these things exist and be under the ownership of these companies? Absolutely not. But under these dire circumstances, there's still good art, and you can enjoy that art and talk about it. It's a complication you have to live with.
I love that, Ritesh. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that a little bit more later during our after show when we're going to dig into criticism at large a little bit.
So if you would like to join in that conversation, you could head over to the Andrade Productions Patreon page where Comic Sans is a part of that. And if you become a friend of Comic Sans, you will get access to that conversation as well as all the other extended conversations we've had with our previous guests, as well as future bonus content that Yan and I are going to be uploading there. So yeah, look forward to that.
Ritesh, what is something you've been enjoying?
I've been reading a lot of stuff that's a bit off kilter, I would say. So for instance, I've been reading a lot of Chang Sheng's work. He's a Taiwanese cartoonist, and he's just had his latest work put out in English with, I believe, Titan manga. It's called Yan, and it's basically about a Peking opera artist who becomes a sort of superhero-esque figure, but primarily it's like a big action blockbuster kind of thing as a comic, and it's drawn in this hyper-detailed realist style. Chang Sheng is someone who worked in the advertising industry up to like age 35 and then became a cartoonist, and so Yan is his latest work. I've also read his work Old Man, which is a big medieval fantasy thing that's about a few volumes. That's also getting a re-release this year in English, I believe. So I've been enjoying that and just exploring a bit more of that. I've also been reading the Taiwanese artist Car Market with a K, and his stuff is also mostly online and free for the most part. He does these great horror comics that are just really gnarly and a bit like, if you like Junji Ito, you'll like his stuff. So I've been reading a lot of the Taiwanese artists like that.
We read Uzumaki on this show, Ritesh, and it didn't go well for me. It did not go well for me.
It went great for me though, so I'm gonna go check this out.
Yeah. Certain brands of horror are definitely like an acquired taste for sure.
Yan, what about you, Yan? What have you been enjoying?
I've just finished playing this I think it qualifies as an indie game. It's called Carry On. Have you played this game?
I've not played this game, but I've been I finished playing Dredge recently, which I thought was really great.
Very similar tonally.
Indie games are like my thing because I don't care about the detail of the grass or like the detail on someone's eye and the hyper-realism. It's about the stylistic, weird indie stuff for me. That's the fun part.
Yeah, it's so much about like what can you do with less and acknowledging the medium rather than trying to like go for full realism or something, which is so much of the AAA brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carry On is really fun. I really enjoyed it. It's a really short game, but you basically play as kind of like the xenomorph from Alien, and you're trying to escape this lab and get stronger and bigger, and you eat all the people inside, and you really look disgusting. There's like so many tendrils, and I can see Nat's face frowning.
This sounds amazing to me, but like I have freaky taste, so
no, you should check it out because it is. I think the big thing is John Carpenter's The Thing. That's what the pitch. It's if you were the Thing.
Love Carpenter, so totally my jam.
I'm not a gamer at all, but I'm going to throw this into the mix because I just recently heard about this. There is a YouTuber I follow called Rob Scallon, who's a guitarist. And he recently, well actually it's over many years, but I think it just got released, put out a game called Fretless. It's also it's an indie game.
Ooh, okay.
And it's like an RPG where you play as a musician and you attack through music. And it looks really cool. So I'm just going to throw it out there. If you guys want to play it and let me know how it is, that will be cool because I'm definitely not going to play it because I don't even know how to download games.
Yeah. I would say I'm not a gamer, but I'm like more a games tourist. I just like to, dabble here and there and be like, okay, that was neat. That was fun. That was interesting.
Dredge is a great one for that, though.
Yeah.
I really did like Dredge.
Yeah, the stuff I kind of like is like Spiritfarer, Dredge, that sort of very like narratively charged experiences that are like, okay, let's make it atmospheric. Let's really engage with something. That's fun for me.
And Fretless, I'm looking at it right now, looks pretty cool. Thanks for the rec, Nat. Maybe I will check it out and play it on your behalf.
I got to look at this as well, yeah.
But this is not video game sans. This is Comic Sans. And Ritesh has brought us a wonderful, wonderful comic to read that I'm really excited to talk about. Tell us a little bit about it.
Brahm V is someone whose career is really interesting, I think, especially in the context of both Indian comics and American, just Western comics in general, because Ram started out making comics, in Indian comics. I remember there's a comic called Agori and all these local stuff, and he'd worked there just to like hone his craft a little bit and just get his reps in. He kickstarted his own thing called Black Mamba, which is like this Mumbai noir crime story. And that was this kind of big breakout thing. And from there, he did stuff like These Savage Shores and all of these things. And then he kind of got into Big Two and kind of became a big name. And he's the biggest Indian comics creator, I think I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And someone who actually is from India and has worked in those comic circles and all of that as well. Like not just like a diaspora creator. So it's that very interesting background. And on the whole, his most interesting stuff, I think, is his indie work, wherein he's just like, let me do like 5 issues and like use the form really, really well and do very culturally specific, unique comics that don't really have any comparison, don't really exist anywhere else. So he's done stuff like, Lila Starr, and now he's done Rare Flavours, which is a comic entirely about this sort of Hannibal Lecter-esque monster figure who eats people, and he loves food. And then he's got this companion, this normal guy he's hired to make a film documentary about food. They travel across India and they eat various foods, get involved with various people's lives, and the 2 people try to hunt these guys down because this guy is a monster and they're after him. And the entire comic is sort of then about 2 people just sort of venturing around India and exploring its food culture and cuisine and having, these reflections and discussions and exchanging their perspectives. It's a really interesting comic.
I want to just rewind a little bit back because we have talked about Ramvi before in our episode on These Savage Shores. And just to remind Nat and our listener, right? So Ritesh mentioned that Ramvi's worked on the big 2, right? So that's meaning Marvel and DC. Specifically, it's been like Carnage, Justice League Dark, Detective Comics, Catwoman, and Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is probably, for me, my favorite of the work.
Swamp Thing is the best thing he's done in that sort of corporate arena for me by far.
It's incredible. Yeah.
It's such a complete story and such a complete, complex arc. I love it.
And also, very interestingly, right, if I'm not wrong, he was a chemical engineer, right, in India before he was a comic book writer.
It's perfect because it's so much. He puts so much in there.
And I think that's like something that we're going to talk about in Rare Flavors, but that this man has so many varied interests that he's able to like fully bring into the story in such an organic way. But before we talk about Rare Flavors in depth, we have to recap for our listener, Nat and I have to sum it up what we've read in 5 words.
And what we've read is specifically issues 1 and 3. Well, actually, Yen and I read issues 1, 2, 3, but because we couldn't help ourselves. But we are going to primarily going to discuss issues, or chapters, I believe is how it's used in the book. Chapters 1 and 3 of Rare Flavors. So if you want to pause right now, if you haven't already, and you want to go and read those 2 chapters and come back and join the discussion, you can. If not, we're going to try to, take you along for this journey as best as we can, assuming you haven't read it, and try to paint the picture of what we have experienced. So let's start with the 5 words, Yen.
So let's hear them, Nat.
I'm going to start with something easy, but I think it's layered, which is the first word I'm used to describe Rare Flavors is gastronomical.
Okay.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Okay, yeah, solid.
I think maybe mine's a little facile, maybe it's a little easy, but I'm going to go with scrumptious.
Certainly is.
No, okay, my next word, balancing out what we've said so far, insidious.
I think my next word is something that I think is quite evident in a lot of Ramvi's work. I think I would say it's uncompromising.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
I like
and
that word.
I want to get into that. But
yeah, I want to get into that. I don't even know what that... I mean, I kind of get what that means, but I want to get into that. My last word is going to be yearning. And I mean this both in the sense of like, craving food and whatever, because that's a big part of the story. But also I think there's I mean, at least in the first 3 chapters we read, there's a lot of yearning in Mohan, and even to a certain extent in Ruben. And yeah, as he's trying to make this documentary. But let's get into the summary now.
I'm going to try and do it as swift a fashion as I can. Ruben, a supernatural demon from myth, walks the earth as a man and spurned on by the passing of Anthony Bourdain.
Which is crazy. I love that part.
Chooses to produce a documentary with Mohan, a dispirited filmmaker, charting his relationship with food across the centuries, while they are being chased by 2 figures who want Ruben dead. Also, spoiler, Ruben's eating people at the same time.
Yeah.
Important detail.
Yeah.
Importantly, he doesn't eat Mohan because Mohan is obviously of great value to him, the filmmaker. And so he eats people that they encounter along the way. Specifically, they eat people whose stories Ruben tells. People who are related to food, people who have a deep history with food. And Ruben goes on these great lengths to tell these stories of these incredible people who have suffered for their culinary arts and then proceeds to eat them. Okay, he also eats a truck driver, so I guess he's fair that way. But
hey. He's so sad about eating the truck driver.
Truck drivers are very important for, any culinary practice. They are the guys who are transporting all the ingredients. getting all these things done. You need the working class guy who's willing to do that to make that food stuff happen.
So true. So
and
true.
you gotta eat the working class guy. let us not say Ruben does not support the working class.
Yeah.
Shall we get into it, fellas? Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. I thought it was brilliant. I'm a big foodie, but both in the sense of eating, but also like cooking. And the thing is, in Singapore, I hardly cooked, even though I loved it. Because if you've been to Singapore, I don't know if you have.
I have. As a kid, I went there. It was a great time.
Right, yes. I
Oh,
mean, Singapore
great.
is known for its incredible food culture and like hawker culture. And so food is just so affordable that often it makes actually less economical sense to cook. When I was there 30 years of my life, when I had a full-time job and working, it just was no time and didn't make sense to cook. But since I moved to the UK 2 months ago, I'm freelancing now, so I have a lot more time on my hands. And also, British food,
Yeah.
eh.
Yeah.
Both in terms of taste and price. And very much like the person we meet in chapter 3, I believe his name is Naim.
I made sure to include that issue just because I want to talk about that story.
Yeah, so just like Naim in chapter 3 of this book, I've suddenly craving all these foods from home. So I've been cooking a lot more and really enjoying the process of becoming a better cook, discovering how to mix flavors and make deeper flavors. Like I have like a master
Find
stock that
rare
I keep in my
flavors.
freezer. Yeah, so like things like that. And so I really resonated with the stories and the love that this book shows to cooking, and then tying it in with this insane narrative of this demon. But yeah, that was my initial reaction.
I also loved it, right? I think Ramvi is just brilliant. And I think Filipe Andrade's work is also so perfect for this. There's something so coarse and expressive about it. We were just talking about the limits of realism in video games. The characters look so loose, but then the food looks so perfect. Right? The food looks more perfect than it could look in real life. It's like how in the Ghibli movies, right? In the Ghibli movies, the food they eat looks so delicious, but our food could never look like that. But on top of that, just the poetry of the language. There's so many caption boxes, which historically, if you think about it in terms of like superhero comics from like the 60s or 70s or whatever, right? The caption box is a way to just almost like quickly glaze through information. But Ramvi treats each of these captions with such like tenderness and care. And there's so many like beautiful turns of phrase. Like you could read this as a script. And we're so lucky that we also get to read it as a comic.
I think that's one of the key hallmarks for me of great comics writers in general, where like language is something they're really obsessed with and they're really taken with. Because there's a lot of comics writers you can read where you can just read through the story and like, well, it works, it's functional. Yeah, things happen, but you don't really remember the lines. You don't remember, like, the sounds don't ring in your head. But Ram's stuff, I think, what it really has is a voice. You will never mistake Ram's comic for somebody else's. There's a very distinct voice to it. And there's an obsession with language. If you look at the first issue and the treatment of language in general, like when the Chaiwala talks, how that comic treats language is really interesting to me, because in other comics, when he talks, what would happen is in the balloons, you would have dashes where they would just put in the English. But instead, Ram lets the actual Hindi speech be rendered into English and then puts a sort of black translation bar, like in a subtitle, like in Parasite or like any sub movie you're watching. And he puts the English below while letting you give the sound of the Hindi and the actual native speech. And language is, again, there's such a consideration for the finer details and specificity here. And good writers can do a lot of things, but great writers are really obsessive about these details. And that's what I really like.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that translation thing up, Ritesh, because like when I came across it, I was like, whoa, this is the first time that we've seen anything like this. And it's such a contemporary reference because, like you said, it's what you see on Netflix, it's what you see on streaming services, the way the subtitles are presented. It works so well.
It's really uncommon, and it's a strange thing because the way a lot of these English comics treat language is like, it's a very certain times it even gets Orientalist in terms of just like othering certain languages. Like sometimes you'll read a superhero comic or whatever, and they'll be like, they'll reference the language of Pakistan, and instead of saying like maybe Urdu or whatever, they'll be like translated from Pakistani or whatever. And it's just like,
I know the exact moment you're talking about because it became such a moment because what Kumail Nanjiani, the comedian, shared this, and he was like, I was reading this comic. What is Pakistani?
There's a lot of that, or like even the lettering, sometimes they'll just like take features of, say, Hindi script. It's a stylization thing and it's so weird, but like what Ram does is he just normalizes the language, lets you sort of take in the language, and also then provides the translation below. He treats those moments as almost much like the way they do video. Again, like you said, it's a contemporary thing. We're all so used to it while watching videos wherein we get the subs. It makes all the sense in the world.
I want to pick up on this point that Ritesh just made about normalizing, because that's why I picked the word uncompromising. And this is why it matters that Ramvi grew up in India. These are stories he's connected to. There's like no otherization about this. There's no tokenism about this. This is just the story. This is just a story, and he's not bending. I mean, let's be honest, right? Boom Comics is largely being distributed to American and Western audiences. And there's this expectation sometimes that a story doesn't take place in the West, that some spoon feeding has to happen, right? That the audience is being treated as stupid and they need to catch up on some stuff. But Ramvi doesn't do that. He's just telling the story and you're just going to pick it up.
Yeah. And a thing I want to add to this, and it's something that will build on the episode you did on These Savage Shores, is especially in terms of when writing to a Western audience or just something that is being presented to a Western audience. Usually the art from Asia that kind of blows up in that context is the one that usually includes Western presence in some measure or some way, so the West can actually see themselves in it. So for instance, you look at the popularity of Lagan or RRR, wherein the British are very prominent in the British presence, and like, so it is about the people of India in relation to the British, and the West is very present and people really care about it because it's in the conversation with the West. But that's a different thing for me compared to something where it's just like, I don't know, you watch a general SRK movie, right? Shah Rukh Khan movie. There's no West or anything. It's just the pure interiority of a place and its local culture and like just living and experiencing that life. That's a different thing for me. And These Savage Shores is a great comic about, these Dracula-esque mythology of like vampires meeting, this local mythology of Rakshas, East and West, all of that. But at the same time, it's a comic that's very much in the milieu of all these other things, where it's an easy one for like the Western audience to come into, especially with the opening issue, where it's literally from the title These Savage Shores to the opening issue, where it's just focused on the white guy with the comic, playing into the expectation of he's going to be the lead, and then it subverts that expectation. So it's playing on that expectation, subverting it, but it's still in that milieu of works, right? What I like about something like Lila Star or, Rare Flavours or even a Graffiti as well is they're all just dramas that are just like, here's just Indian life. Let's run with it. Let's explore the interiority of these people. And psychogeography that's a big part of Ram's work with that reason. We're in this obsession with the way places shape people and, people shape places and all of that. And yeah, I love Rare Flavours because it feels like a natural evolution of Ram's exploration of what does it mean to be quote unquote Indian in many senses of the word that can mean and entail, not in a nationalistic sense, but like in a cultural sense of what does that entail? Because something like The Swamp Thing is a comic about, say, a guy who leaves India and moves abroad and, works as an engineer and basically sells out his own people in the name of capitalism and his ideas of, oh, I've moved over abroad. I know better than all these people over here, and the damage that actually does, and he has to reckon with the horror of that. And again, Ram's writing these complex stories about culture and people and just reckoning with identity. And like, I love Rare Flavours because it's the natural apotheosis of that in the sense of what expresses culture more clearly, better than like food. Food encapsulates so much culture and history. It holds so much about a place and the people. It tells you so much. And I love that. It's a book entirely dedicated to exploring that.
This question you just raised about like, what does it mean to be Indian? It was just quite a dangerous question right now. We're seeing art makers make very different choices on how to do that. And it's so refreshing to see Ramvi approach this question, at least in the 3 issues I've read so far, with the lens of diversity. Not like a DEI diversity, but like a diversity in the ground. Like, there's no homogeneity to this experience.
Yeah, Ram rejects any kind of flattening and homogeneity. And like the thing, like he's obsessed with, say, in Layla Star, he's obsessed with the Chinese immigrants in Mumbai and their lived-in experience and the way they've been erased, where they're at, and their cultural presence, and how they add to the complexity of what it means to be Indian, or like what the place is, and the general richness of the entire culture and history, the complexity, and all the ways you can't actually flatten it out to this weird thing that fascists can use, right? there's an engagement with the specificity. That's what I love about Ram's work. And something like Rare Flavours, which is about the specific dishes, specific recipes, and the specific meanings they hold to these specific people. I love that.
There's almost something like he's almost Ruben in a sense, and we are Mohan, right? Because Ruben is trying to show Mohan, look how delectable everyone's life is. Hopefully Ramvi's not eating as many people as Ruben,
But he ate in this one.
Hey.
Thank you, Nat.
Hey.
Thank you.
He was cooking.
There we go. We've talked a lot about Ramvi.
Yeah.
And rightly so. But I do want to also give
Filipe Andrade
his flowers.
Yeah, and Anworld Design, who lettered the comic, also incredible, I want to say.
The lettering is really fantastic.
Darron Bennett specifically is the letterer, with Anworld being his studio. And Darron's one of my favorite letterers. He does a lot of manga re-lettering, by the way, which is, again, another special craft because you have to re-letter the stuff that the Japanese mangaka did into English. And he does a lot of the Taiyo Matsumoto adaptations. And Darron's so good at that stuff, but he's also really good at the normal English lettering. And his Antworld studio does a lot of work, but, he's done Lila Star and, Rare Flavours again. Great stuff.
I want to talk about my visual, which I just want to show off.
Yes. Great cover. Great cover.
Which is,
Is yours signed?
I have a gloss cover signed by Ramvi at Singapore Comic Con.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Okay, showing off.
I'm just saying. Okay, Nat, go ahead. Talk about the visuals.
No, I just want to start with the first thing. I mean, not the first thing, but when you open the book, the first thing you encounter are these chapter pages, these chapter title pages. Interestingly, each chapter is titled the food that they sort of encounter or prepare, in each chapter. So the first chapter is chapter 1, Masala Chai. These chapter cover pages are incredible. I mean, just this first one is just this sort of close-up of Ruben holding a cup of masala chai with a cigar in his mouth. And just the way that this is colored is so different from the rest of the book. I would say it's almost color pencil. It looks like color pencil. And it's something almost, I mean, I might be wrong here, but do you feel there's something almost like Wes Anderson-y about the way that it's framed and colored? I don't know.
I think there's a lot of animation influence in this way they approach this stuff, and that's also very cool.
There's something very wispy about the way Andrade draws images.
Wispy is a great word for that, yeah, for sure.
There's always something trailing, and so it creates motion. It really creates a lot of motion when you're looking at these still panels.
And then you get into the actual panels of the comic, and the art style is just so expressive. A lot of it, which I think is really interesting, if you go to the page where Mohan and Ruben meet, right? If you look at the backgrounds, it's plain, blank backgrounds, right? You see two hands shaking against just a green background. You see a close-up of Ruben's face, close-up of Mohan's face. It's so stripped back to just focus on these characters and the experience that they're having in that moment.
The thing I want to note is that there's a lot of artists in comics. A lot of them can draw, say, these almost romanticized, muscly figures who are almost punching each other or in action, like those superhero-esque poses. But for me, the real judgment of a great artist is how well can you do talking scenes? How can you make those visually interesting and engaging to the reader? How do you block out a talking scene? To me, that's the mark of oh, you really have chops. Filipe Andrade, he has the chops. He's so good at making those talking scenes engaging. He knows how to do those things. It's great.
It's how can you use the blocking to communicate another layer to the conversation, right? Which is, again, something we talked about in these Savage Shores when the prince is talking to the colonizer. I also just love the gloss of the table. It's such a simple thing in theory, but it gives it all this sort of sunset feel. It just feels like the sun is setting outside and everyone's on the cusp of making a decision.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that some panels are just hands.
Yeah.
While the conversation is happening and the speech bubble tails go out of the panel. I mean, I'm sure it's been done before, but it's just so clever. Yeah.
That's what you want, where you want the reader to be visually engaged. And for instance, you'll see a lot of talking in comics and it'll be done when a YouTuber does a YouTuber apology video where he just stares at you straight and just talks at you. There's a lot of comics pages that are like that.
And then whips out a ukulele.
Yeah, there's a lot of comics pages that are like that. Sometimes they'll be on a 9-panel grid, sometimes not, but they'll just, no blocking, no visually interesting stuff. It's just talking right at you. And that to me is a bit dull. Because even in film, right, that's not the best way to film talking scenes. You look at a movie like Michael Mann's Heat, the best scene is two guys talking. You don't want to film that kind of scene in that kind of way. You want to make that visually exciting. You want to give it tension. And so that sort of direction of those talking scenes matters a lot. And I think Ram's work understands that nicely. And especially with the artists he works with, because a lot of great writers like Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Ram is also an artist. He's a cartoonist. He can draw, and he's a very visual writer. So that's a huge part of why I think his comics have worked so well visually.
Lot of incredible choices in this book. I do think the recipes are like one of the most obvious formal choices within the book being made by Andrade and Ramvi. So as we've mentioned, each of these issues covers a certain dish and how it's prepared. And so scattered within the issue is images of the ingredients / basically like a step-by-step break on how to make this thing, paneled out, occurring usually within another story. Right, so what I mean by that, so like masala chai, we're hearing the story of the man who's selling the chai, and in between that, we are getting blue panels with recipes.
This is the sort of thing where usually they put the overall recipe at the end of the book, or maybe at the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
But what this book does is it cuts all of that and puts it in the right spots. And the effect, I think, overall is you're getting these emotional human stories on the recipe amidst that, and there's a kind of building of emotion throughout. It's fascinating. I really love the choice here.
That building is something I want to come back to, where it's like they're happening in parallel. As the life peaks, the dish is prepared, and then we get to the conclusion of this where this life ends up as well, and the dish is also finished.
It makes sense because comics is, for me, an art of juxtaposition, because the page is the unit, right? The page is the singular unit. Anything you put on there is juxtaposed or paralleled, and if you can do some interesting things with that, you're golden. The more interesting things you can pull off on that level of juxtaposing things or paralleling things, the better.
I mean, for me, it just, on a very surface, simple level, it just puts into parallel the hardship of the lives of these people and sort of the journey that they've gone through, and the trials and tribulations with the amount of labor, in many ways, even you would say hardship, required to produce these foods. To me, it just does such a great service to these cuisines that often in a Western culture are seen as just cheap food that you get. There's this debate in the culinary world and the gastronomical world of why French food and Italian food is allowed to be priced at this price point, while South Asian or, Southeast Asian or East Asian food is seen as, lower value, even though arguably the amount of preparation and love,
so much work,
required to prepare these foods is greater.
If you see your mom wake up early and cook up all that stuff, you're never going to say that shit should be cheap. Like, you're never going to say it.
No.
And I want to add here, the thing is, if you generally, like comics tend to do, if you put these recipes at the beginning or at the end as separate, you just get them as dry steps, right? But when you put these in the comics, suddenly with the juxtaposed, put right next to these stories, rather than just these dry steps, they become part of these people's interior lives. It's not just exterior actions anymore. They're part of the interiority of these people, and they gain a significance and an emotional resonance that otherwise wouldn't be there.
I love that. The interiority of a recipe. If you guys have ever gone into recipe websites, there's always this beginning chunk where it's some story about my grandmother used to make, and there's always people will be like, skip the story, get to the recipe, and because when you are looking on a website for a recipe, you are genuinely just looking for the recipe and the steps. But then here, it brings these two things together in a way that's like, you don't want to skip the story. You want the story to accompany the recipe. And maybe this is how all recipe websites should be, story, step,
comics.
And it's interesting because like I read a lot of food manga as well. So like Oshinbo, Drops of God, which is like a 700 issue saga about wine and wine critics, which I also love. So there's a lot of food manga I love. Like I grew up on like Yakitate Japan. I even read Shokugeki no Soma for a bit there as a kid, which is funny.
Food Wars?
Yeah, Food Wars. The interesting thing is those comics also to a certain extent understand the significance of don't put the recipe outside the story, put it inside the story and make it significant to the people. And then if you do so, everything becomes so much more meaningful. I think it's a much more established tradition in like manga, whereas like the Western comics, due to like their general insularity in terms of how many topics they are not willing to usually tackle as much, especially in the serialized form of like single issues. It's a lot of like superhero adjacent stuff or like genre pitches. They're not really doing a lot of the food stuff in those 20-page single issue comics. But this does, and like it brings that novel approach, which is the least novel in this landscape, and does something fun with it with like a specific cultural cuisine, which is not really explored much in Japanese manga either. So it's fun.
On that point of fun, I want to talk about one of my favorite moments is the opening of issue 3.
Yes.
where Ruben is tied up, his captors have found him, and they're about to chop at his leg. I love this bit. I love this bit. And then it's one of them's they're saying like, okay, now let's get ready to cut him up. And one of them holds up his machete high and he goes, I will start with your, and you turn the page, and then it's a leg of lamb.
This page turn
Yeah.
is genius.
Yeah.
It's an incredible page turn.
Yeah, there's a lot of good bits in there, but I also want to point out to the language bit with the two hunters' names being Dilkush and Dilshan, which, if you know Hindi, is a bit of a fun thing wherein Dil basically means heart and Kush is happy. Heart happy is one guy's name, and Dilshan is like heart shine. But also, Dilkush is specifically a bakery dish in India.
Oh.
Bread with like sweet stuffing, like coconut and like a little fruits and all of these things. It's a sweet thing. So that's also a thing. So there's a fun bit of like language and illusion going on there.
That's so cool.
I love that. Like, it's so accessible to someone who doesn't know that. And then there's still layers of meaning and depth for people who are in the know.
Yeah, there's a lot of specificity in there.
So, for example, with this roast lamb dish, right?
Ran. Yeah.
And then it says ran. And I'm like, okay, I'm assuming this is a leg, but I'm not sure. And then immediately there's a little description about it. And then it says, oh, it's a leg of the goat. And I'm like,
Yeah. One of the things I really like about this comic is just, at its heart, I think it's about consumption versus creation. The guy, Mohan, our central lead character, is this dispirited filmmaker, and he's basically given up on art or just making anything by the time the story starts until, Ruben kind of forces him out. And Ruben's this guy who's basically trying to teach this kid how to fall in love with creating again, how to fall in love with, just making something again. Especially because having been heartbroken, the way Mohan approaches everything in the story is Ruben's showing him all these great places. Like, there's a great bit in issue 3 for me. This is the defining bit wherein he's taking him to this spice market, right? Spice markets are such an Indian thing. It's like you go, or just an Asian thing in general. Like, you go to spice market, you have all this history, all these great things. And Ruben's showing him all these places, and he's telling him, here's this place that's been here for hundreds of years. Here's this history. And he's like, isn't this wonderful? And Mohan's just kind of staring at this with this camera like, we can take this shot here. This was going to go crazy. People are going to love this. This will sell so well. And then Ruben's just kind of baffled. And he's kind of like, the whole time we've been here, you've only been talking about selling things. It's not about selling things. It's about making them. Eventually, there's a great bit where they're talking and he's just like, how do I teach this kid that you don't create from a lofty place of just like your idea of legacy or how my mother would see me? You can't create from that sort of place. It's like you can think, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that to make my mom proud. I want to have a legacy bigger than Gordon Ramsay or whatever. You won't ever get there if that's how you start. It just has to be, I want to make some great food, right? Like with anything, you just have to focus on making something good for yourself and derive meaning from that and take joy out of doing that. So much of this book for me it feels like a reflection on like, what's the difference between art and content? Not just engineering something that's meant to be a hit or a success, not just trying to work out or math out or make a formula. He's just saying, no, it's about the process and just like the innocence and love of making something that like expresses your soul, that pleases people's souls and your own. This means something. This has cultural history. Don't just demean it to like its monetary value or what can sell. It's like, that's not what it is.
I mean, speaking of what Ruben is trying to teach Mohan and, indirectly us, I want to ask you guys what you feel about the last words of Ruben in chapter 3, which is when he's being taken away by the two dudes and he's saying, Mo, listen to me. I know it seems like I'm some terrible demon, but I was trying to show you something. It's the people. It's always been about the people. Turn the page. People are the single most beautiful, delicious, and flavorful things I've ever encountered in my near eternal life. Don't you see? You are all utterly beautiful, and if you could only see yourselves the way I do. And I left it and I was so confused. I was like, should I be agreeing with this? How should I be feeling about this? And I'm sure it will be clarified maybe later in the book, but I was like, it sat strange with me.
What I love about this book, as far as we've gotten to it, is that Ruben dispenses such incredible wisdom, and then he's also eating people. He's also an awful guy. And so it's very hard to put those two things together. And I think that's like a messiness that Ramvi kind of deliberately entertains and loves to play in that space of his protagonists are often not good people.
Yeah.
But that's not what makes good storytelling.
Yeah, like there's this weird American and just Western thing in general, comics especially, because there's this entire tradition of superheroes. There's this idea of people have to be good for me to follow them or care. It's like the idea of the good hero. And it's fascinating to me because you go back thousands of years, even the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the first written things, nobody in that story ever thought Gilgamesh was a good guy. Gilgamesh was a monster. He had absolute power, but he was a really engaging figure to read about. You go back to the Greek heroes. The Greek heroes were not good people or moral people. They were terrible on that level, but they were really engaging people. Heroes were known for being capable of extraordinary things or having extraordinary abilities or capacities, but weren't necessarily like moral good people you wanted to be. Heroism was actually, almost a curse, and in general was tragic. And you go back to something like the Mahabharata, where like there's no good guys in there. Everybody fails. Everybody has fatal flaws. Good people do horrible things. Bad people do very beautiful things. And the complexity of people. It's only the Americans I find who have this thing about like absolute power must be absolutely good and moral.
I mean, Superman is the epitome of that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love that you bring up the term fatal flaw, because that was more of the defining trait of a hero than anything, was that something about them was wrong.
Often it's hubris. Yeah.
Love where we sit with Ruben. I love sitting in this messiness with Ruben where I'm like, yeah, humans are
tasty,
beautiful. I wouldn't say delectable, but I still want to know what's going to happen to you.
The thing he's really trying to illustrate to him is, the way we judge others, we think of less of people, the way we flatten people. We just take so many things for granted. And he's like, I'm not like you guys, which is why I can look at you guys and appreciate you for all the qualities you do have, which you just take for granted or look down upon or just forget you have in your lowest moments. You're capable of so many beautiful things. The thing a guy who eats these people understands is they all have an interiority. They all have a complex life. He narrates all of those lives for you. And the fact that he eats them after makes him even more monstrous for that fact. But at the same time, he has an understanding of the infinite complexity and capability of one single person in life.
The tragic thing is that perhaps the most these three people we are seeing who get eaten by Ruben, the tragic thing is the most they are ever seen is in the moments before they die, by the person who's about to kill them.
I don't know if this was Ramvi's intention to kind of venture into this area of discourse, but Yen and I, we read Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees.
Yes.
And we went into this discussion about the moral ambiguity of eating meat and what that looks like and, in relation to these sort of like anthropomorphic animals eating each other and how that makes us feel as humans. And I think there's something about this. I think the cannibalism, well, it's not really cannibalism because he's a demon, but the human eating theme has inadvertently continued and it's making me think of this idea of, the way that we talk about food. And especially meat, the way that we talk about the language that we use in the culinary world, we describe it with these such beautiful language. Right? Look at the marbling, look at the, and we have all these grades of beef and whatnot. And we go to great lengths to create the most beautiful and perfect cuts of this and that. And in some strange, twisted way, this is a non-human creature who happens to eat humans. And he's just talking about us the way that we would talk about this cow that we've slaughtered. If you step outside of sort of our moral normalcy or whatever we perceive to be normal, there is a sort of gray area there where it's like, as much as we feel like what he's saying is fucked up, how we talk about these dead cows is also pretty fucked up,
Related, there's a great bit of writing advice by like Cassandra Kah, I believe, wherein she talks about, if you want to really get good at horror, study food writing. The way they describe food and cutting meat, making all the food stuff. Study good food writing, and if you can take the lessons and apply that to horror, you're golden. That's the way to do it. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That is really interesting.
Can you imagine after this season, Yen, I just become a vegetarian?
That's what I was going to say. Well, this is season 4 is the season where Nat becomes a vegan.
Nat takes up Impossible Burgers.
Yeah, I think so. I
do get an Impossible Burger when I can.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
There's a lot going on in this comic, and we talked about like building on theme, and like one of the things I really like about this book is I look at the other book that the same team did, Andworld Design, with like Deron Bennett and his crew, and lettering, Filipe Andrade on art, Ramvi on writing. They did Lila Star, and that book is about a god falling from the sky and descending to the earth and trying to understand people and life and humanity. But to me, this book is like the earthy opposite of that celestial book. The demon of the earth who's been broken by demigods and has always been on the earth, who's always lived in caverns and caves, who's had to hide in shadows and suffer, who knows us the way we don't even know ourselves because he's always been hidden in the underworld and he's just kind of always been here, always seen us. And it's a great piece of companion work, and I love that.
In terms of myth, right, I think it's fascinating that Ramvi has returned to the figure of the Rakshasas twice now. And on that, his take on the figure of the demon, right, which in both cases, I'm already starting to suspect, but we're not there yet, but there is some level of they are misunderstood. They have been demonized. Ravana is also, if you look at the story, right, he's not actually like really, really the bad guy.
Ravan is a complex figure, yeah.
He's a complex figure, exactly, right? He's a complex figure, and that's something that Ramvi is continuing that tradition of, specifically by invoking the Rakshasas at all, because when we think of like the devil, it could just be the devil. It could just be like evil for evil's sake. But there's something here about the muddyingness of it that then contributes again to us not knowing how to receive his wisdom.
Yeah, I think that's just also part of like a lot of, I think, great classic Indian myth. I look at something like the Mahabharata, right? Duryodhana is such an interesting character to me because the quote-unquote heroes or the casteist monsters who are very cruel and shitty to Karna, Duryodhana, the sort of like super evil bad guy, is the most loyal friend and ally to Karna. And this is what brings Karna's eternal conflict and struggle of, I can have everything in the world. I can be king of this land. I can have anything I desire, but I would have to betray my best friend. And that's the one thing he cannot ever do.
I want to rewind all the way back to Ritesh was talking about this as one of is this the third 5-issue series that Ramvi has done? Or is this the fourth?
Graffiti's Wall and Blue and Green are about the same length, but they're graphic novels.
Right.
And the others I would say are Radio Apocalypse, Ramvi and Andrade tried to do, but like it never finished. But like These Savage Shores, Rare Flavors.
Layla Star.
Rare Flavors is an issue extra with issue 6, but it's all in that 5 to 6 issue range. If you want a great 5 to 6 issue comic, nobody writes one better than Ramvi at this point.
So I want to bring that up because actually when he was at Singapore Comic Con, I asked him at his table, I was like, because I have my own theories. Why do you do this?
I do have an answer, technical materialistic answer, but go on.
So his answer may be similar, but it's math, which is 5 issues lets you have a beginning, middle, and end. You have your rising action and your falling action. And I just loved that explanation. It's so simple, but when you read the books, you don't actually feel like that. They're not necessarily tied to the whole in a negative way.
They're like a perfect novella. They're not too long like a novel. It's just perfect novella length stuff, and it's just great.
But so what's the techno-materialistic answer? I want to hear this.
This is an answer that I got from like Pornsack Bishop Show. The ideal length for a comic in the direct market of comics, and like Bishop Show had literally worked at DC and Vertigo for like decades and has the experience with the market. So like the ideal length is 5 issues for a mini or 15 issues for a longer book, because 5 issues, the drop off with each issue isn't too much. So like that 5-6 issue sweet spot, perfect, you can end it. If it's 15 issues, you can basically go 5 issue per book, 5 issue per book, 5 issue. You get 3 volumes and you can sell those as multiple volumes in the books market, right? That's perfect for the book market. In between that, so like 10 issues, that's the weird odd point. Something like maybe 12 issues is like a Watchmen or like those 12 issue maxi series. Again, that's a bit of an easier sell.
Oh. And Swamp Thing, if I'm not wrong, was 6 and then 12, right?
Swamp Thing was 10 issues, and Swamp Thing was an ongoing, but the way Ram wanted to do it was he wanted to do it seasons. He wanted one artist. There's John McCrea doing one issue 7 with John Constantine. But beyond that, one artist. And that's a hard thing to maintain, right? Because you have to draw every month, and that's a tough thing to have one artist. So to have time, they did 10 issue one season and then a 6 issue second season. And that works out just fine. It's a model that Grant Morrison had tried with the Green Lantern comic prior with Liam Sharp. Even Ellis's The Wildstorm revival in the late 2010s tried it a bit. The materialistic reason, by the way, is why you don't get a lot of long runs now, the way you used to with The Sandman by Neil Gaiman or Preacher by Garth Ennis. That sort of long run like the old days. And it's one of the things that a lot of the modern creators kind of mourn, because it's tough to sustain the sales and get that sort of long run to tell a big story. So it's kind of reserved for like the bigger creators like the Brian K. Vaughan doing a saga.
It needs a brand name, really. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're kind of a brand, you can do it. If you're smaller than that, you kind of have to do like a lot of those mini books.
I want to pivot to something. We've just not talked about it yet, and I want to hear your thoughts on this aspect of the book, which is we've talked about how wonderful the writing is in this comic. Ramvi's writing is poetic. As Yen was saying, some of the turns of phrase are incredible. And I think one of the things that makes it work so well is the framing of the narration that happens. It's not just in a vacuum. It's not to us, the reader, as we see so often in many comics. It's to a specific person. It's to this person called Mansi, who I believe is his daughter.
Mansi is a person who's important to Ruben. Let's leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just feel like that framing is so clever because it gives an audience to this writing. It gives an emotional intention to the writing. It's not just an omniscient narrator telling the reader information that they need to understand the story. There is a layer of emotional sort of connection there that just infuses the writing with so much love.
The way a thing is delivered is in fact maybe just as important as the thing that is being delivered. The form and function, they're very, very important.
It didn't click for me that this is an epistolary until right now. Do you remember what else was in an epistolary?
What?
These savage shores. Right, where the narration of all those books are letters exchanged, right?
Right.
Or journals. But in this one, it's more uniform. It's all coming from Ruben. And it's so relational, right? It's not just who's saying it, it's who they're saying it to.
Yeah. The other thing I want to point out, even though they all get eaten, one of the standout parts of this book for me is the working class people in their lives and just the interest in their lives and interiority, which I find is also kind of rare in a lot of these kinds of comics. If you read a lot of Indian comics, they're basically, a lot of them are trying to do like these superhero-esque mythological whatever. You know, say you walk around the street of Coimbatore or whatever. There's a lot of people whose lives you will never see put to like a visual medium because there's simply no interest in there. And there's a lot of class implications of that and just because of the insularity of art. And the thing I like about this book is it's a chaiwala's whole life story. You get that. There's an interest in his life story and like, okay, what's his life about? How has he come here to like sell tea here? What's his deal? Like, what are his struggles? Let's sit with that for a bit. Or let's sit with this truck driver. So let's just sit with his story and like the beauty of his life itself. Let's actually immerse ourselves, take a time to see with that. And like even somebody like Naeem, who's much more privileged, where like his father worked his ass off and sent him to America and he got this great job and he had this lavish life. But then he found it utterly hollow and was just like, I have money, I have all this, but just it doesn't move me the way that just coming back here and making this simple dish my dad taught me does. It's like, yeah.
And there's so much beauty in the ordinary, right? There's no need to put on some like action artifice.
You can tell this is the writer of the Graffiti's Wall. I'll put it like that.
Yeah. Graffiti's Wall, that is about the ordinary lives of these people surrounding this wall that has street art done on it, right? And each issue is a different person. Am I remembering this right?
Yeah. It's focused on these character portraits, and that's the thing, right? Ram is really interested in people who are not powerful, who don't have power. There's such interest in life. I love that. That's what I like about his work the most. There's a real investment in life and people and how they live in all the mess. I love that.
And I think that can kind of be captured in this one exchange between Ruben and Mohan in issue 3, when Mohan is on this spiel that we were talking about earlier, when he's on this commercialist bend, right? People love this sort of stuff, old things in new places, magic in the mundane, that sort of thing. And Ruben goes, stuff?
Mundane.
And then Mohan walks away looking at what we're going to eat. And Ruben continues. It goes, he's horrified. He goes, mundane? And that's almost like a challenge, right? From Ramvi to us to be like, if you are bored by this story, what is wrong with you?
Do better.
If you don't care about the chai seller, if you don't care about the truck driver, if you don't care about this man making this beautiful leg of lamb, you are reading the wrong story. You are maybe reading it the wrong way. The way you are approaching art is just not the way you should be doing it.
There's so much beauty and horror in every little person, every little action. And there's so much meaning and grace there. The love of life is just, the work is full of it.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end the discussion, the love of life. And the only thing I want to say to close us off is I love the character design of Ruben. That tiny head is so good.
On a giant body with a great hat. And the littlest glasses you've ever seen.
My favorite panel, I think, is at the end of chapter 3 when he gets caught like with 2 knives in his hand with Naeem just tied up. You know, he's just like caught like a deer in the headlights, and you can just see his proportions in its full glory. Just the tiniest head.
Yeah.
That's all I want to say.
Filipe Andrade, so good. I love it.
We have so much more we want to talk to you about, Ritesh, about this comic, but also just more widely about your work and your thoughts on the comics world and comics industry. And we're going to save that for the after show. So once again, listeners, if you are interested in that conversation, jump over to our Patreon page where that will be exclusively available to all tiers on Patreon. So all that being said, as we wrap up today's discussion, usually how we end is that the comics half of the podcast, usually Yen, would ask the Sans half, usually me, whether they will keep reading the rest of the comic. And so in this case, you have the honor of asking us that.
Would you keep reading this book?
What's the point?
Surprise! Yes.
Yes. I need to know more about this demon.
I'm actually dying to read more. I had to stop myself from continuing because I didn't want to get into spoiler territory during the episode.
It's so good. Thank you for introducing this to us, Ritesh. It's so good.
And thank you for, it's just such a thoughtful level of analysis. I was like, I'm so excited to hear how you approach this book, and I'm learning things as we're discussing. Nat, do you want to take us into...
1, 2, 3, 4. Pipeline, pipeline. Come on, everyone. It's pipeline time.
I liked the drum fill better from last episode.
Oh, sorry.
Well, how this goes is, the first question is, who would enjoy Rare Flavours by Ram V, Filipe Andrade, and World Design?
I think if you just like, say, Anthony Bourdain or just any food shows, this is your jam.
That was going to be my answer.
Yeah.
This is your jam. Or if you like Hannibal, the show Hannibal, I think you're also in for a great time. Mads Mikkelsen Hannibal, you're in.
You're stealing all the great answers. Now Nat and I have to think of other things.
I mean, I think genuinely, like, just any piece of media that, you know, showcases cooking in a beautiful way, in a way that loves and honors the art of, like, I'm going to say, okay, I'll say The Bear. Tonally, I think a bit different, but just the way that, I mean, the food scenes in The Bear, like the way that they show the craft and literally the blood, sweat, and tears people put into making food, this goes into that as well. So I think, yeah, if you're into that, you love this comic, yeah.
Basically, I would say if you're trying to escape Neil Gaiman after much of the news that came out last year about his behavior regarding the women in his life, and you have wanted to start Sandman, or you like Sandman and you want more of that, I would say this is the place to go.
I agree with that in the sense of Ram's work to me is very much in dialogue with the British invasion movement and wave of writers that came before and defined a lot of these comics. And a lot of writers in the comics period try to like crib from or like take and just respond to like a lot of what that movement did, right? The movement of Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Neil Gaiman, Warren Ellis, Garth Ennis, Mark Millar, all these folks that came in. A lot of people try to like tackle them, but I don't think a lot of their attempts are as meaningful as what Ram tends to do, because both formally and just in terms of subject matter and like the actual meaning and perspective that he puts on some of the ideas and the way he engages with that stuff, fascinating. Issue 2 that I won't spoil too much, but like it's the idea of spice, right? Sometimes you eat a food that's spicy, and it's spicy, sure. There's a point to that spice because it's a bit difficult to eat, but you go through that difficulty, but you experience the taste after, and it's like, wow, you know? There's a kind of point to that, and like some experiences are meant to be difficult. They're meant to be a bit spicier. That's what this book is about. Sometimes rare flavors do take some effort. They do take difficulty, but they're worth it.
Excellently said. Excellently said. Now for the second half of the pipeline. If you enjoyed Rare Flavors, what comic book should people be reading next?
If you like rare flavors, I would recommend the classic Japanese manga series, Oshinbo. You can read that. There's tons of volumes of that. And like a lot of food manga from Japan, they're kind of about paternal conflicts and like relationships, because a lot of food manga in general is about these father-son dynamics. Each Oshinba volume is one's about rice. And so each is a specific thing. So if you like rare flavors, you're going to probably dig Oshinbo, the classic food manga.
That's a great rec. I think I'm going to say similarly. I mean, I don't really think it needs me plugging it, but Dungeon Meshi. Yeah, which is about cooking, but it's also an unconventional one about cooking because they're cooking magical creatures.
Yes, if you like fantasy and if you like food, you're in for a fun time.
Absolutely. And I think the last recommendation I'll make, which Ritesh and I already mentioned, is Graffiti's Wall, which is an earlier Ram V work And if you like the nuanced depictions of people's real lives, that's a great book to be reading in the comic book form.
That's a book that was initially published in the UK and then republished in the American market by Dark Horse. And the thing that feels stand out to me is it feels closer to like the Tamakis is Roaming or This One Summer than anything like superheroes. And that's what I love most about it. It feels it's special.
Thank you, Ritesh, for joining us on the show. Thank you for your wealth of knowledge. We're looking forward to continuing this conversation in the after show. Please support us on the Patreon if you want to hear more of that.
Ritesh, is there anything you would like to plug, anything upcoming that listeners can look out for?
I have an interview in the big sit down with Ram that's going to come out relatively soon. I can't confirm the date, but yeah, that should be fun.
Very exciting.
Whoa,
Yeah.
looking forward to reading that.
Yes, I'm sure if people just follow you on your socials, you should be announcing that when it comes out.
Yeah, I'm just on Ritesh Writer at any platform.
Okay, well, before we end, I have to give a little sneak preview of what we're going to be reading next. I will say it was on Ritesh's top of 2023, I believe. And all I will say this, and I think he's going to instantly know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to tell Nat what it is. It's if you like wrestling, you're going to like what we're reading next.
I do like wrestling, so I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited.
If you want to read it before the next episode, please go ahead and then and then you'll hear us talk about it. So we'll be reading Do a Powerbomb by Daniel Warren Johnson. But that's everything from us on this episode of Comic Sans. Thank you again, Ritesh, for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
To our listeners, thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next page.
See ya. Thanks for listening to Comic Sans. This is an Andas Productions podcast hosted by Mal Yante and Nathaniel Ma and produced by Scott Lee Chua and Roshan Singh Sambi. This episode was audio edited by Maddie Searle and video edited by Kit Ling Leong. Our cover art is by Isabel Fang with motion graphic animations by Konechny Studio, Mariana Rudakova. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review Comic Sans. And while you're at it, follow us on social media at Comic Sans Pod. Links are in the descriptions below.